U.S. history assignments that compare conservatives to Nazis, white female teachers now accused of murdering their African-American students, and a professor arguing now that you have a moral right to identify as the age you think you are, not the age you are. Next on The Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Dr. Duke Show. Every week, Katie and I cover those really impactful stories from K-12 classrooms and college campuses all around the world. Greetings to our listeners. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and never miss an episode. Make sure you stick around because later in the show, we're going to discuss literally the idea that you should be able to identify with any age you feel, which means Katie is going to have to start wearing diapers, and I'm ready for my Social Security check right now. I'll keep working, but I feel like I'm 65.
Yeah.
So fork over those greenbacks, Social Security.
You're going to be wearing diapers then, too.
Oh, great point.
So there you go.
The difference? My diapers will be paid for by my Social Security Medicaid. You're going to have to buy your own diapers. Well, our first story is a doozy today. This is from Mount Lake Terrace High School in Edmonds, Washington. We have a mom of an 11th grader in an advanced placement U.S. history course who is wanting to know why her child is experiencing blatantly biased assignments. Her son brought home 2 worksheets explaining broad differences between liberals and conservatives. The day the students did an exercise in which they tried to find out where they stood personally, right? Here's the first image about the differences between conservatives and liberals. And this is absolutely hysterical.
Yeah, the thing that's so great, the first thing you see, at least the first thing I saw on here, was Don Lad Trump. Not even Donald Trump. They can't even spell the President of the United States' name properly. And then you have the right to bear arms, B-A-R-E. So if you want to make a naked arm, you go for it. So Mom thought this was actually a great idea, and I know I've done this exercise in my own classroom, but the information you put out has to be as broad as you can make it, and so you're not trying to sway these students. So when you look at this first sheet, you can see how they depict left wings, which they say are, the Democrats and liberals, versus the right wing people, who are the Republicans and conservatives. And on social issues, they say, well, if you're left wing, you want gun control and you're pro-choice and universal health care. But if you're a right winger, it's less funding for social programs. A right to, again, naked arms.
And I love this handout is all about the bottom line there. You have a timeline right at the bottom, and on the far left, so you got at the far left you've got Karl Marx.
Oh,
right?
Karl Marx.
When you Carol, not Stalin, the great murderer, not
Pol Pot.
Lenin, not Pol Pot, not Chairman Mao. The worst they could come up with for extreme leftism is Karl Marx, who's one of their heroes. Look at the other side. Adolf Hitler.
Oh.
So when you carry conservative or right-wing ideas to their logical conclusion, says this flyer, you get Adolf Hitler. By the way, Adolf Hitler was not a right-winger. Gun confiscating, social medicine implementing, homeschool banning, left-wing socialist, right? National Socialist People's Worker Party. But what they have identified here is that you take the right-wing ideology to its logical conclusion, you get Hitler. But on the other side was just Karl Marx.
Oh, he's just a philosopher.
An economist.
Yeah. He's such a nice guy.
Go visit his statue in Seattle, right?
And the fact that they also put in here the 2 images, they have Don Lad Trump, again, Don Lad, and Hillary, which Hillary is also spelled wrong, but they put Hillary's image, her little silhouette out there as a world leader as well. And then the fact that they put the first names of people, like who's Ted? Ted Nugent. Ted anybody, and we think maybe Ted Cruz. We don't know.
It's got to be Ted Cruz.
It's got to be Ted Cruz, but we don't know.
But again, look at the
Bill
image.
And Ted. We don't know.
Look at the image, right? I mean, you've got Ronald Reagan, who's on the right.
I thought it was Ronald McDonald.
Maybe it is Ronald McDonald. But to the right of him, you've got Ted Cruz, and then it leaps from Ted Cruz. Tell me that's not an image, right? Who's the next person after Ted Cruz? Adolf Hitler, right? And you've got Bernie and Bill, right?
Oh, they're just fun guys.
But it gets even worse. We have another set of images from this textbook that these supplemental materials that are being used in this American history class.
Yeah, so on top of this, they got 2 worksheets, okay? In the second worksheet, what I love about it is the fact that it's not even American-made. It was actually created in the UK, and if you go to informationisbeautiful.net, this English company was basically contracted to make these images, and that's what our teachers are deciding to use. And so on the left side, you have the left, and on the right side, you have the right. And of course, it's blue versus red. And they have all this imagery on here and all this information, which just, taking a look, wow, you can see there's a lot of information going on. But if you look a little bit closer, I'm going to start with looking at the beliefs. So what are the beliefs of the left versus the right? And the very first one that gets me, on the left, the belief under religion is that it's scientific. And I just find that to be poetic.
They don't even realize their own hypocrisy. They're trying to make an argument that we progressives don't believe in religion. Under religion, we're scientific, except when it comes to things like gender, right?
Oh, biology.
Where that's out the window. But and they don't even realize that what they're basically saying is science is our religion, which is exactly the problem with progressives when it comes to science.
Exactly. And then you look at what they believe. They believe that, others must observe rights, but only the rights that they agree with, which doesn't make sense. They believe that the homeless are downtrodden and victims of the system. And when you take a look at it compared to the right, so while on the left they believe the homeless are downtrodden victims of the system, apparently on the right, we believe that the homeless have no work ethic and no sense of shame.
One of my favorite aspects is at the very bottom again, where Democrats are identified as little doves, right? When it comes to attitudes, the Democrats are dovish, and notice what the Republicans are. They're hawks, right? Exactly. And so we know that they're all for aggressions. Republicans are all for aggression and militancy. So Republicans and conservatives are viewed as hawks who are aggressive and militant, right?
Yep.
And as far as the Democrats go, they're about diplomacy and pacifism.
Of course they are.
Is it my imagination, America, or are the most militant, loud, vocal groups in this country all on the left?
That's true.
I mean, right? We got a handful of Charlotte VA protesters. I guess that causes for a cause of right-wing militancy. But you've got Antifa, you've got Black Lives Matter, you've got Occupy Wall Street. I mean, we could go down the list of these things. The real militancy, and who's the one pooping in who are the ones pooping in cop cars and throwing bricks through windows?
Not me, said
These dovish Democrats, right?
Exactly.
The problem with this, guys, is this is a supplemental piece of material. In other words, if you showed up to this kid's classroom to observe for a day, you might not even see this. And the textbook they're using every day might not demonstrate this. But these kinds of things are constantly being handed out to your kids extracurricularly, right? So you don't know they're being done. This happens all the time in your kids' classrooms. There is no paper trail. This is done by the teacher's whim. She prints some of these educational materials off a website, hands them to your kids, and if you go complain about it, there is no paper trail here to follow. Your kids are getting all sorts of things like this in the classroom, but they're not doing it in part of the original curriculum. They're putting one over on you. And it's not the egregious. I mean, it's not the egregious things that make the nightly news, right? The idea that kids are getting arrested, dragged out of school for being truant, or the idea that kids are being suspended for a week for wearing an NRA. That stuff makes the news. What never makes the news on any, and it's what we're here to help you with, to give you these kind of stories. This is what's going on every day. It's the subtle push left. All the basic assumptions, all the extracurricular stuff in the classroom that you have no idea about is constantly moving your kids left and lying about the way the right is portrayed.
And if you want to take a look at it for your own family, they actually have a section on here about family, and that's the part that I think parents need to look at to what is being taught by these teachers. They're saying that on the left, the family structure is there's a nurturing love because the parent is nurturing, and then that creates a self-nurturing child. Meanwhile, on the right, you have a strict parent with tough love, and that builds a self-reliant child, as if it's like a bad thing. But on the left, it's all about nurturing and love.
Yes, the nurturing child is the good child. The self-reliant child is the one who participates in all of this hawkishness and this militancy, right? Again, looking at this, it's almost laughable, right? At least they spelled most of it. Give the Brits that. At least they spelled most of these things, right?
With a couple U's.
But again, what are you doing here? You are setting the standard ever farther left. You are normalizing progressive political values, and you're slurring and you are misrepresenting things that conservatives and Republicans stand for. Can you imagine, by the time you get into kindergarten to the time you graduate from high school, if every year, every semester, every week, your kids are getting extracurricular supplemental materials like this, and we wonder why more than 50% of millennial kids support socialism. We wonder why younger kids think that they should be taken care of. Things like self-reliancy and independence and making your own way. These things are now frowned upon by millennials. Now you understand why, right?
All right, well, that's enough of Karl Marx. But before we move on, throughout the past few months, we've been excited to see more people watching the Dr. Duke Show and listening to the podcast. And apparently, we've woken the beast of Facebook giants who have told us the show does not adhere with their community standards of progressive inclusion. And they've gone so far as to permanently delete our ad account that we've used for, to promote the show so everyone can see it. Therefore, effective immediately, we are going to be streaming the show directly to our Freedom Project channel on the YouTube. And I know many of you might say, well, they're just as bad, but for right now, we need a place to be. And that's an easy enough place for people to access. So we're asking you to please help us share this YouTube episode on Twitter. You can share it on Facebook if you want, on online groups and blogs, email. You can text it to your friends. I know you can do that. It's been wonderful to see how many of you like, share, comment on the show. It's been a really great opportunity to watch it. And we want to make sure that we continue to grow and that people know where to find us. Also, for those of you who are listening to the audio podcast, nothing is changing there. But please help us share that as well. Thank you all for supporting the Dr. Duke Show. It truly does mean so much to us. We're going to go on now to a different professor from the University of Georgia, who is a professor of educational theory and practice, which is to say, they're not teaching anyone anything.
Yeah, when you see education professor, that's an oxymoron.
Just run away. All right, Bettina L. Love, her name is Love, wrote an Education Week op-ed, and it's called, Dear White Teachers, You Can't Love Your Black Students If You Don't Know Them. And here's her lead. She says, for black and brown children in the United States, a major part of their schooling experience is associated with white female teachers who have no understanding of their culture. That was certainly my experience. My K-12 schooling was filled with white teachers who, at their core, were good people, but unknowingly were murdering my spirit with their lack of knowledge, care, and love of my culture. Murdering my spirit. Yeah.
So white female teachers murder minority students. That's the takeaway here. And we went one step further. Hey, Bettina, if I may, your kids' culture is American culture. Got news for you, honey. Your kids grew up in America. They're American kids. They've never been to Africa. They've never toured China. Your kids are American kids. So your culture is our culture. You can pretend all you want, it's not. You can pretend that somehow while you're driving your cars and using your Facebook and dealing with your cell phones, while you're eating American food and wearing American clothes, you can keep pretending that some pasty white woman who grew up in Decatur doesn't understand what's going on in the life of a 8-year-old African-American kid living in Atlanta, but that would be bull tripe.
All right, well, she goes on to say, she talks throughout the whole op-ed about how black folks are highly visible and invisible at the same time in America. So how is poor white teachers supposed to know if they're being visible or invisible? And of course, Colin Kaepernick gets brought into this whole thing because he's highly visible. And she says, the sad truth is that white people can spend their entire lives dismissing dark people's existence and still be successful in life. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for us. So she's trying to say that white people can dismiss dark-skinned people and be successful, but black people can't dismiss white people and be successful?
It seems to me that progressive black people spend their entire time in the media, Colin Kaepernick on TV, in Hollywood, dismissing white people, right? Dismissed. We are not going to let you do this black director of the horror movie I don't even think of his name.
I don't even know the
There's
name.
There's a brand new horror movie out.
Called Us.
Called Us, African-American director. So doesn't see himself casting any white men in his leads in his movies, which is fine. Don't. But that's a dismissing of white men, white people. The phrase white male is a dismissive term. And look, here's the other thing that cracks me up about this. The many of our white female teachers who've got education degrees from big major universities are themselves woke progressives. And they can't understand what it's like to be black. So give me a break. Let's do this. Let's immediately suspend all public school classrooms. Let the kids be educated at home or in private schools until you have 90% black female teachers. Let's do that. Not only will this evil white murdering of black kids go away, we would shut down the stupid public schools altogether. And in that case, I will support Bettina Love 100%.
Problem solved. And this Bettina, she speaks out often. We actually have a video of her from 2016 where she discussed how African-American girls are most vulnerable.
Black girls are misunderstood, misread. A lot of their identities teachers do not understand, or oftentimes, they are victims.
And I got to ask this question. If little black girls are victims, given that little black girls in the home, in their private lives, in their play lives, in their church lives, tend to spend most of their time around other black people, who's doing most of this victimhood, by the way? You want to argue that white female public school teachers, whose simple job is to teach them math for an hour, they're murdering these kids. And then you talk about how victimized these little black girls are. I would hasten to remind you that most victimization of black children comes from black people, just like most victimization of white children comes from white people. You can't have it both ways, Bettina, but then again, you wouldn't be a progressive if you didn't think you could.
Well, and her conclusion is, the question is not, do you love all children? The question is, will you fight for justice for black and brown children? Not all children, but just for black and brown children. And how will you fight? I argue that you must fight with the creativity, imagination, urgency, boldness, ingenuity, and rebellious spirit of abolitionists to advocate for an education system where all black and brown children are thriving. I call this abolitionist teaching. To love all children, we must struggle together to create the schools we are taught to believe are impossible. Schools built on justice, love, joy, and anti-racism.
That's what our schools are built on. Love, justice, anti-racism.
And joy.
And joy, not math and reading and science. I got news for you, Bettina. You're onto something. If you want to equalize all races of kids in school when it comes to education, then don't teach them subjects. You got it exactly right. Stop treating kids as individuals. Stop letting grades measure kids. If what you want to do is to have a truly fair school system where everyone comes out the same, then let's immediately stop teaching intellectual courses. Math, English, reading, get rid of all of them. The only way you're going to turn every kid into the same kid is if you stop teaching them serious subjects. And that's where the public school has been heading. Cheer up, Bettina. Under things like Common Core and all this other crap we've been subjected to, that's exactly where the schools are headed. Utterly rejecting education in the name of politics. We're halfway there.
Well, let's go to some microaggressions, because I feel like you're just being aggressed right now. The Southern Poverty Law Center, good old SPLC, pointed some attention to an article by an Oakland, California teacher named Brett Turner, who wrote an op-ed, or an article, I guess, called Teaching First Graders About Microaggressions. The Small Moments Add Up. And SPLC wanted to draw people's attention to this article, and they put it out in an email. And it got published in Teaching Tolerance. It's a nonprofit which gives free resources on mission with their mission of social justice and anti-bias.
And we're back to this again. But notice what they want. For the two angles of this story, that you have a professor actually arguing, and many professors are doing this, teachers and professors too, actually arguing that we need to teach microaggressive behavior to 5-year-olds. Again, how do you convince a 5-year-old that laughing at a joke or being curious about somebody's haircut or the clothes they wear, how do you convince a 5-year-old? And why would you want to? That kind of curiosity that actually brings people together. Little 5-year-olds are eminently curious about the kids around them. But if you're going to take every time a white kid asks a black kid about that color shirt he's wearing or about the nature of his hair or vice versa, you label this a microaggression. You are not protecting kids from racism. You are enforcing racist codes.
Well, he does say in his article that instinctively children tend to understand what is kind and what isn't. It's almost second nature for them to separate empathetic and loving behavior from actions and words that are pernicious and hurtful. What's more nuanced, though, is to figure out that sometimes those harmful words or actions hit all the harder because they carry the added force of structural inequity. As our students work out how to be together, they should be the beneficiaries of as many words, concepts, and strategies as we can give them.
I just fell asleep when you said structural
inequity.
I fell asleep.
Structural
when
inequity.
When you started talking about that.
A 6-year-old would know what that means.
Exactly. I zoned out. And the 5-year-old's going to be right there with you. This is absolutely ridiculous what you're telling these kids. You're basically admitting that kids are kind, that their impulses are to be kind, and you're going to overwrite that kindness with your politics, making them no longer kind. That, my friends, qualifies as a first-class academic dumb.
You explained also that these first graders in the thick of learning to read and write. So while we're actually teaching them, let's put that aside. We should teach them how to communicate with others and make it the perfect time to introduce the concepts of racism, bias, and injustice.
What is the thick of teaching them to learn how to read? Implying that teaching them how to read is some really deep, complicated thing like teaching them calculus. And the irony is we're not. We're not teaching these kids to read. Every metric we have says that they're falling farther and farther. It's not the thick. It's the anorexia of reading, right? These big fat reading books. No, it's the anorexia of teaching kids to read. You're not doing it. And you want to go in and take away the little that we are doing and replace it with an awareness of racist and bias and structural inequalities.
The main thing is the fact that, just like you said, it's like this anemia they have out there, and that we're teaching them pretty much nothing to begin with. But even that little bit of reading and writing and math that we should be teaching them is too complicated for these teachers. So let's just put on another dose of racism.
He is literally arguing that the woefully inadequate subject-based education we're giving these kids is too much.
I can't
and we
handle it.
must interrupt what little we're doing with even more social justice.
I feel like that's a microaggression right there.
Yeah, the whole thing's well, you are a hawk, right?
I am a hawk.
You are a hawk. I'm a hawk too. We're
love it.
conservatives, and so
I feel
there you go.
All right. Well, speaking of militant, we have students who are harassing our Border Patrol agents who are simply just visiting a university to give a talk. So we have 2 Border Patrol agents who were asked to come speak to a campus club, the criminal justice organization at the University of Arizona. And they were giving their talk and everything seemed fine. And then they were interrupted by a demonstration started by all we know her name as, Denise, with 2 S's, who is a studies major. What is a studies major? Okay, just take a look.
This is supposed to be a safe space for students, but they allow an extension of the KKK into campus, an extension of the KKK into campus.
So judging from that insane rant, studies major is a major in how not to study anything. I mean, if you honestly want to draw a parallel between ICE agents and the Ku Klux Klan, if you want to make that parallel, you are not only historically ignorant, you just lack fundamental critical thinking skills. I mean, you could have come up with less obnoxious and ridiculous comparisons that might have garnered sympathy from somebody with a brain, but this does not. And look, these are federal agents, by the way, in public schools and public universities. They have every right to be there. And the fact that you are that'd be like walking into the DMV, right, and picking on one of those poor cashiers, counter people, and insisting they leave in the name of equity and justice, you wouldn't get very far. Alas, our college campuses haven't learned that same lesson of tolerance.
Yeah, I did like the Border Patrol agents. They were like unfazed by this, like, ugh. As if I don't see this every day at the border. Like, let's be real.
Right. They've got M13 gang members.
Yeah.
They've got multiple child molesters that they're trying to deal with at the border, sneaking back in for the 9th time because cities like Los Angeles keep letting them on the loose. I'm sure some snot-nosed little punk kid who's screaming KKK is the least of their worries.
Yeah, well, Denise and her studies major.
Is it Denise or Denise?
Who knows? But either way, she... one of the members of the group actually came to talk to her, and that's when she got extra racist.
They're murderers, and you as a club should be more conscious of the rest of the students on this campus and the students that need to be safe on this campus, and maybe find a meeting place outside. Safe? No, I do not feel safe with them here. Nope, I'm going to stand. No. Oh, of course, white woman calling the police. White woman calling the police.
All right, so Denise says that she'll only sit in and what she's going to be saying the entire effing time, because it's the truth that these Border Patrol agents are murderers. And then white woman calling the police.
Yeah, that was my takeaway. White woman. So can you imagine if the shoe was on the other foot? And you had a Caucasian student saying, black girl on the phone, black girl on the phone.
Or it's then saying black man on the phone, because she says both. White woman, white man. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So once again, we have another piece of evidence here that real racism, if you consider racism like most normal Americans do, to be judging and attacking people simply on the basis of their race, or using race as the only thing that matters in our discussion of people, Denise is guilty. Mm-hmm. The ICE members aren't racist. She's a racist.
Yeah.
Of course, that would never fly on a progressive college campus where Denise can't be a racist. Denise can spout real racist things like that, but she can't be a racist because she has no power. Well, Denise had the power to harass those people and chase them off campus. She had that power.
Well, and now we're taking back that power, because she is facing a misdemeanor charge of interference with the peaceful conduct of an educational institution. And the University of Arizona police are still working to determine if the students will face, there's another student involved, I guess, but we don't know the name of that one. But if they're going to face other charges, and the Office of the Dean of Students is reviewing potential violations of the Student Code of Conduct. So at least there's something happening. I was happy to see that the president, Robert Robbins, sent a letter, because this got around campus right away, way, saying they're committed to free speech and that the student club and those officers, they were invited by the students and that they should be able to hold their meeting without having a disruption like that.
And of course, how soon before Al Sharpton or DeRoy McKesson or Jussie social justice warrior Smollett argues that what this really is an institute of institutional racism, right? Structural racism, because this black girl was trying to speak her truth and she got a misdemeanor. This is the police coming after the innocents, right? The police.
There'll be a riot.
The police should have been arresting those ICE agents, but they dared to give her a misdemeanor offense for blocking free speech. I can't wait to hear Jussie on this one. Come on, Jussie.
Well, we have another instance on a college campus, and this time it involves arson. At Tulane University, there was a student's dorm room was apparently set on fire, and now they have 3 suspects who are being booked in a Louisiana jail on Saturday. You have Robert Money, who's 21 years old. He's a Tulane student. David Shelton is 20 years old. He's also a Tulane student. And Naima Okami, who's 20 years old but goes to Brown, which is in Rhode Island. So I don't understand that connection. But these 3 gentlemen are facing aggravated arson counts for setting fire to a dorm room door of Peyton Lofton, who is a member of the Young Americans for Liberty. And so Peyton says that it's a sad day in America when radical activists are lighting dorm room doors on fire because they disagree with you politically. And cops are saying they're not sure what the motivation is, but Peyton claims that it's because he is part of the Young Americans for Liberty.
How could you not be clear what the motivation is? These are 3 radical progressive kids, and they are on record as having harassed these groups before, or at least picketed these groups before. See, this is what happens. The more the progressive left keep insisting that smaller and smaller acts of microaggressions are really full-blown racism, the corollary to that, right, is that progressive kids feel they can do ever greater acts of violence and censorship against normal conservative people, right? So the fact that the college campuses are allowing kids to gripe on smaller and smaller levels and taking them as if they are full-blown hate crimes, the more this is going to seem normal to kids.
Well, and here's the thing. If you look back in history, there's a great book called RADS, R-A-D-S, and it's all about the bombing that happened at the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus in, I think it was 71. And it started with just, okay, we're protesting. Oh, we're not against this. Like we hate Vietnam and all these other things that are happening in the government. And it just grew and grew and grew until a radical blew up a bomb and a man died because of what they're doing. Now they're starting to set fires, and it's 2019.
And why is this not on the national news? I mean, every time somebody sees a swastika in a bathroom, almost always put forth by the person accusing somebody themselves, right? Almost always fake hate crimes. Whenever somebody sees a piece of thread dangling from a branch of a tree and they immediately insist it's a noose, all this stuff makes national news. You know what it never does? The fact that somebody almost tried to burn down somebody's dorm room or burn to death the people inside it because of their politics. This is what happens when universities don't push back against these microaggressions and say to these kids, come on, grow up. Just because somebody told a joke that you found a little off color, or somebody asked you about your earrings and you're a different race than them, or somebody had a different opinion about social justice than you do. Stop pretending this requires a university investigation, bias response teams getting involved. Just have the guts to tell some of these kids, well, I'm sorry you're hurt, but this doesn't rise to anything. We're going to move on. If you don't start doing that, universities, you're going to get more kids setting fire to more dorms.
Yeah, and I wouldn't.
In the name of social justice.
Yeah, and I'm sure now that we have an example of it happening, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to these 3. Because if they get charged, if they actually are found guilty, if they actually pay a crime, go to jail, something has to happen. Because otherwise it's like, oh, they got away with it. It's going to escalate.
And I simply ask you, the campus police refuse to identify a motive. If these were, again, 3 white kids, can you imagine the media furor? Can you imagine CNN would stop doing everything else for 48 hours if 3 white students tried to set fire to the door of 1 black activist? Do you think the campus police, would find it impossible to come up with a motive for that?
Let's head over to an interview Dr. Duke did with Alex Newman about a Common Core contributor who is a major contributor to the English language arts standards, who's now a whistleblower about those reading standards.
We welcome Alex Newman to the show. Alex, you're our roving, independent, international correspondent. Thanks for joining us again.
Thanks so much for having me, Duke. It's great to be with you.
Really illuminating interview and conversation you've had with Dr. Louisa Moats, right? And Dr. Louisa Moats, if you don't know that name, she was one of the women hired, ELA expert, to help construct the Common Core reading standards, the ELA standards. And now she's sounding the alarm about her own program. Talk a little bit about where Mrs. Moats is coming from.
Yeah, thank you very much, Duke. And so Dr. Moats was, one of the people hired by the Common Core team to help develop these literacy standards in the early grades, right? She's an internationally renowned reading expert. She's been studying this for many years, had federal grants to look at this kind of stuff. And she recognizes, as all reading experts do, that children need the foundational skills to be able to learn how to read. They need phonics, and they need a phoneme awareness, and they need these basic tools to be able to decode the written language. And what happened, at first she thought this was going to be a positive thing, that it was going to be, like a guiding document for states to look at and say, wow, that's like the gold standard right there, and let's try to emulate that. And unfortunately, she was very disappointed with what came out, and now she's sounding the alarm, warning that this is going to do and has done a lot of harm to children's ability to read, and that when you damage it in the early years, this is going to end up being a lifelong problem. It's not something that you can fix in the 11th grade or the 12th grade of high school. The damage is done. And so I hope people will go read our article, and I'm coming out with part 2 now, and people can get a sense of what she's some of the concerns she's raising.
So this is somebody who's not willing to disavow the entire national program of standards and all of the ideological stuff, perhaps, that's being filtered into the school. She's not on our side with regards to that, but she does recognize that this sight word garbage, the demotion, the removal of phonics, and a lot of this other garbage that they're doing at the lowest levels, she does acknowledge now that this is a big mistake. Now, is it something that she says she wanted out of it, or is she only recognizing after the fact that it's bad?
Yeah, well, she's sounding the alarm now. This is, I guess, not what she envisioned when she went to work on this. And now some of the people she's worked with have actually acknowledged the damage that this is doing. And so she's hoping that some of the damage can be mitigated. She says awareness is spreading about this. But you mentioned the sight words, and that, that's one of the big concerns she had that she and I just talked about. And Dr. Blumenfeld, who I wrote Crimes of the Educators behind me with, he called sight words the thalidomide of the brain, this drug that was causing children to be born with deformities. And he would say that when you expose children to sight words, you're handicapping their ability to read. You're damaging their brains, the physical structure of their brains. And now, neuroscience has proven this. You can see that the brain gets wired wrong. And so Dr. Moat said, this really is very problematic. And nobody learns how to read properly by memorizing whole words. And yet this is exactly what the Common Core mandates starting in kindergarten. And so that's one of the areas that she expressed a lot of concern about. And she thinks that there's an awareness now growing about this. You can look at the data now. We've covered a lot of it at the Newman Report, at FreedomProject Media, showing that we have an illiteracy crisis of epic proportions now. But the good news is that this is starting to get out. Even a lot of the big left-wing journals, the New York Times, NPR, Ed Week, a lot of these big left-wing publications have now started acknowledging that the process that's being used to teach children reading all across the country is deeply flawed. It's unscientific. It goes against what the evidence shows. And so I think Dr. Moats is optimistic that we can fix this. But, right now it's very clear that we have a crisis on our hands. Did
Mrs. Moats give you any sense of why they put it in to begin with? Where did this come from? I mean, she was sitting right there in the room. What was the rationale for this?
Yeah, I tried to get into this with her, and I could tell she didn't really want to go there. My view is that there's a conspiratorial agenda at work here, right? We've been teaching reading and writing for thousands of years, and it was no problem, right? In late 1700s, early 1800s, we had big parts of America where reading was almost universal, right? Literacy was almost universal. Studies that were done, Connecticut, New England, one of the studies was done said that not 4 out of 1,000 people can't read and write legibly. On top of that, I can't write legibly, right? So that should tell you something. And how is it possible that now we spend well over $1 trillion on so-called education, and we're graduating kids by the millions who can't read their own high school diploma? I'm convinced this is not an accident. But I think the way Dr. Moats sees it, and I don't want to speak for her, but I think the way she sees it is that there's just this kind of crowd within the reading community that really believes that, and a lot of them have said this, that, phonics is some kind of right-wing conspiracy to teach children to read. Some people really believe that stuff. And so I think, there's a sense among the people who know this, that there's a big problem with the reading program, that it's just some sort of accident, that there's some problem with the way people are educated, and that's true. A lot of the people who are getting PhDs in reading, for example, are being taught that kids need sight words for irregular words and stuff. So it's an interesting question, and I think it's one that needs to be explored, because the way we look at this problem is going to be very different if there is a deliberate agenda here or if it's a big mistake. I mean, either way, it needs to be addressed, but it needs to be addressed in a different way depending on what's to blame.
Well, and it's not just how to read, it's what they read. Surely she had a hand in the fact that, to some degree, that they took out all the great literature of Western culture. They removed complicated poetic and fictional narratives for a lot of junk science, a lot of informational texts completely divorced from context that push a progressive agenda. Any word from her on those issues?
No, I think she primarily works with the foundational skills. And so we did actually discuss Sandra Stotsky, who I know has been on your program, Duke. I've interviewed her a number of times for some of my articles on Common Core. And I asked her, so Dr. Sandra Stotsky was, the only English language arts expert on the Common Core Validation Committee, and she refused to sign off, citing all these problems. And, Dr. Moats was, I think, very sympathetic with Dr. Stotsky. In terms of some of the concerns there. I don't think she wanted to go too much into it, but, I think probably those concerns are very broadly shared within the reading community, within the ELA community, and people who just want children to get a good education, even if we don't all agree on political things and even pedagogy. Everybody, I think, involved in this debate really wants the kids to get a better education. So there is some disagreement, but I think there's a lot of agreement as well.
Well, the more we know about Common Core, the more ugly it is. And that's not, I can guarantee you, phonics may be a conspiracy, but we know for a fact that much of what happened with Common Core was, if not conspiratorial, then just downright unethical and illegal. Alex, thanks for your time again today.
All right, moving on to the final story. Tell me about a bioethicist.
Yeah, this is funny to me. This is a story that shows the logical inconsistencies to which almost all progressive worldviews lead. So we have a scholar, a professor, making the moral case. Notice it's not an academic case. Notice it's not a research-based case. Notice it's not an empirically based case. We have a professor in Scandinavia making a moral case for people to be the age they think they are. So you get to be, and look, let's lay this alongside the gender issue, right? If you're telling people that gender is whatever you say you are, and that gender can be anything you want or nothing at all, it's utterly subjective, that you could change genders every 5 minutes if you want to, then how do you necessarily stop this? Right? Well, if I feel like I'm, when it comes to, again, collecting Social Security, I'm a young guy, but hey, I feel old enough to collect me. And in order to validate me, you have to give me a Social Security check. Or, you know what? When it comes to being an adult gay man who wants to date 8-year-old boys, when it comes to sex, I'm an 8-year-old, right? And you really can't accuse me of pedophilia anymore. That's just who I am. This scholar, bioethicist, and I don't see where the biology is in this, and I don't see where the ethics are in this. Nevertheless, a bioethicist named Juna Rasanen from the University of Oslo in Norway made what he called, quote, a moral case for legal age change by allowing individuals to legally change their age from their chronological age to either their biological or emotional age. So that's again, that I may be a 45-year-old guy, but biologically I feel like an 18-year-old. So maybe you need to allow me back into a high school, right? Or my, even better yet, emotional age. Now this is where I have to agree with him. Given the emotional age of most progressives, I could certainly see them acting much younger than their ages, like we're talking about elementary school tantrums.
Yeah, in this Journal of Medical Ethics where this is published, it's called A Moral Case for Legal Age Change. He makes these 3 arguments, and I think that's the first one you said, is the person genuinely feels his age differs significantly from his chronological age, meaning that an individual feels their age is different emotionally. All right, so that's his first reason for being, his first moral reason. He says that the second reason is that the person's biological age is recognized to be significantly different from his chronological age. So, you could be an 85-year-old man, but you work out at RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? She's like 105 now, but she works out every day and does her push-ups. So her biological age actually makes her only like 78 instead, maybe.
Now you just gave every progressive a tingle up their thigh
78, yeah, 'cause
at the
78
idea
gives
that
them hope.
that she's going to be around
hope.
for another 50 years.
That's true. Well, they're also going with Bernie and possibly Joe Biden. So either way, they're in the octogenarian range. And then number 3 is age change would likely prevent, stop, or reduce ageism. And that's, again, RBG. Discrimination due to age that the person would otherwise face. So it's a moral reason that you should be able to change your age, because this way you can't call me I can't be denied a job because of my age.
Right. What they're basically saying, if you boil this down, is that if people treat you your age, they're engaging in ageism. That's literally what they're saying, right? If a 65-year-old man acts like it doesn't feel he's a 65-year-old man, but he's being treated by one in a census or with a birthday cake or in terms of collecting Social Security, you're discriminating against him.
Well,
now.
it's like that story we had a couple months ago where the guy, I don't even know what country he was in, but he is 69 years old, but he feels like a 49-year-old. And when he puts his picture out there on like the Tinder, he gets rejected because of his age. And he wanted to legally change his name because of that.
Yep. And get this. You're an 8-year-old who's been raised in progressive schools, who's been told by his teachers that everybody should be allowed to vote. You're an 8-year-old whose social studies teacher has convinced him that you're an 18-year-old. Why shouldn't 8-year-olds vote in presidential elections then? In fact, you'd almost have to let them, right? And here's what the left is going to do. Every illegal immigrant, every student in a public high school, middle school, is going to think they're old enough to drive or to vote or to smoke pot, right? I can just see all these 11-year-old Colorado kids lining up, man. Hey, I'm only in middle school, but I feel like I'm a 45-year-old Rastafarian who needs a blunt, man. And if you're going to treat me equally, you got to spleef up, buddy, right? This is what's going to happen, I'm telling you. And the fact that I know the word spleef shows you just how much street cred I've got.
Exactly. Well, regarding the pedophilia question, the author does admit that he could foresee a situation in which age change should be limited to at least 18. But isn't that being ageist right there?
Exactly. By limiting it to 18, he has undercut hypocritically his own argument.
It says, if the pedophilia changes his age just to molest children, he probably does not fulfill the conditions for the age change in the first place.
And that's bigoted against pedophiles, because as we know from the progressive left, pedophiles don't molest children. They express their sexual love to people of the age group they associate with.
His body is not biologically that of a child, and he does not identify as a child. But that's the whole point of your argument,
exactly.
Is that you should be able to identify as whatever you want.
Just because you put those limits on because you know people will be outraged doesn't mean that if you get your way, those limits will not be put on by anybody else, because the rest of us, Professor, can see that you can't have the one without the other. Again, if you're going to make the argument that things like gender and everything else are malleable, that there's age and gender and sex, all of these, and race, we're even now, if white people identify as black people, like Rachel Dolezal in Washington State, right?
Sean White, whatever.
Sean White. Yeah. If your shared experience is black, then you're a black person. If we're going to do that, I just don't understand how you can stop this.
Well, it's that time again. Time for some extra credit. This week sponsored by Ban All the White Men, you included. And we begin with a well-spoken gent just north of the border, Dr. Jordan Peterson, known as the superhero psychology professor who fights back on political correctness. Cambridge University has rescinded its offer to Peterson for a 2-month visiting fellowship this fall. While initially accepted and Peterson expressed his excitement for the opportunity, Cambridge backtracked, saying upon further review, they believe Peterson could not uphold principles of inclusivity. The student body then rejoiced because they didn't know if they had enough safe spaces for everyone to live in during Peterson's tenure.
This proves everything you've been saying for the last 5 years, right? That all this talk on the left about inclusion is nothing more than hypocrisy.
But another public enemy will be teaching in England this summer on behalf of George Mason University, whose students are now seeking their own safe spaces after it was announced that a Supreme Court justice was given a 3-year contract by GMU's Antonin Scalia Law School. That justice is the Brett Kavanaugh. And of course, the students were immediately triggered. Kavanaugh will be teaching Creation and the Constitution this summer, but a petition by Mason for Survivors is already trying to terminate and void all contracts. With 2,000 signatures on the petition, students and professors are letting out their rage on the Twitter, where they obviously belong.
What makes me laugh hysterically is that the entire program is named after the Antonin Scalia Law School. Has it dawned on these liberal snowflake idiots that you're fighting the Brett Kavanaugh teaching for 3 weeks thing when your school is named after the great arch-conservative jurist of our time? Silly kids.
From a living white male to a dead one, George Washington is being harassed from beyond the grave. A new vote at George Washington University indicates that nearly 54% of students who took a survey claim the Colonial's nickname is totes offensive. A petition has been going around for a year suggesting that GW change its mascot to hippos, river horses, or revolutionaries, because hippos are just so gentle and less offensive than the first president of the United States.
And I'll bet you if it becomes revolutionaries, then you watch. The mascot's going to become Che Guevara.
Poor Thomas Jefferson is in his own battle from the grave as the students at Hofstra University think this founding father must go. At the second annual event titled Jefferson Has Gotta Go, students of the university and staff from the local Planned Parenthood demand that a statue of Jefferson be removed. But it's not just the statue. Apparently, it's also the representation of racism and bigotry on college campuses. With any luck, this will continue being an annual event.
And why in the world do we continue to give federal money to Planned Parenthood when they're out there protesting Thomas Jefferson?
I've had enough of this white male bashing for the day, so let's just laugh and cry a bit at how college kids are all about socialism. Well, at least until their GPAs are involved. Then the light bulb turns on.
The main idea of socialism being that people at the top are doing their fair share to help people at the bottom. So on campus, if there's a GPA disparity where there's people at the bottom with a poor GPA, we do support a policy where people at the top spread the wealth and give that GPA to people at the bottom.
Help them get a better GPA?
Yeah.
I'm all for helping. I wouldn't give let me just give you some of my points.
But it's about being fair, right? We got to help people at the bottom.
That's completely different.
How is it different?
Because I'm studying all day for my grade.
And this is the life lesson that universities refuse to teach when it comes to socialism. Socialism is great, as the great Margaret Thatcher said, until you run out of somebody else's money.
And that is your extra credit for this week, which you might need to keep all of it if we go to that socialist GPA system. Now, all you need to do is give us a comment below with any suggested stories you want us to cover right there in the comment section. You can do that right here, right below. Then make sure to subscribe to our Freedom Project page on YouTube and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And make sure you subscribe to the Dr. Duke Show podcast on iTunes and please leave us a 5-star review.
And that does it for us this week on The Dr. Duke Show. If you like what you've heard, please share the YouTube episode and podcast with your friends. And sincerely, thank you for supporting the show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie, and we will see you next time.